In the name of our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Jesus immediately reaches out his hand. We just heard in the Gospel from Matthew that disciples got into a boat to go on ahead, while Jesus went up the mountain by himself to pray. And during the evening, the boat was battered by waves, so by morning the boat was far from land. Jesus walks across the water toward the boat. Peter sees Jesus, gets out of the boat and walks toward him, but he gets scared and starts to sink. Jesus immediately reaches out his hand. He doesn't stand there watching Peter struggle while explaining to Peter all that is wrong with his thinking. Immediately, he reaches out his hand. The Executive Council of the Episcopal Church is a group of clergy and lay people. They meet at least 3 times a year to minister the programs and policies adopted by our General Convention. And in his opening remarks at their recent meeting in July, Presiding Bishop Michael Curry talked about the cacophony of human chaos in our country right now, the virus, the reality of racism, and to top it off, a presidential election. Curry said the tensions and the divisions are real and they're deep, but we need not fall victim to them. Dr. King really was right. We will either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. The choice is ours, chaos or community. Curry continued, I believe we must choose community, and we must lift up our voices and help our countries and our cultures and our society choose God's beloved community, God's dream. Our presiding bishop is encouraging us to reach out our hand. In other words, at the start of every conversation we engage in, we can remind ourselves to let love lead, to allow love to navigate our differences. During these trying times, how do we lead with love? How do we keep the faith? Well, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, you don't get to the promised land without going through the wilderness. You don't get there without crossing over hills and mountains. But if you keep on keeping on, you can't help but reach it. So how do we keep on keeping on? How do we keep hope alive? How do we keep remembering to immediately love, to let love lead? We remember through our brothers and sisters. We let other people inspire us. We let the saints, like the great civil rights leader John Lewis, we let the saints move our hearts. John Lewis, who died on July 17th, served in the U.S. House of Representatives for more than 30 years, representing Georgia's 5th Congressional District, which includes most of Atlanta. Lewis was the son of sharecroppers. He found his prophetic voice at a young age. At 5, he was preaching to the chickens on the farm. He preached his first public sermon when he was 15. He graduated from American Baptist Theological Seminary and was ordained a Baptist minister. He helped organize the March on Washington, and he was the youngest person to speak to that crowd of 250,000 people, the same event where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. At the age of 21, Lewis was one of the 13 original Freedom Riders who traveled on buses from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans to pressure the federal government to support the Supreme Court decision that declared segregated interstate bus travel unconstitutional. The Freedom Riders, peaceful protesters, were beaten with fists, stones, baseball bats, chains, and lead pipes. At the age of 25, as part of the voting rights movement, Lewis helped lead the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Pettus was a senator from Alabama in the early 1900s who was active in the Ku Klux Klan. The date of this march in Selma, March 7th, 1965, became known as Bloody Sunday. The peaceful protesters were beaten by police. Lewis's skull was fractured. In the days that followed Lewis's death from pancreatic cancer, I listened to many interviews with his colleagues and friends. And what I kept hearing from them was reverence for Lewis's kindness. The man who had been beaten while peacefully protesting was entirely committed to nonviolence. As the historian John Meacham remarked, for Lewis, nonviolence was not simply a means to an end, it was his way of life. He insisted on meeting fear and hate with hope and love. Congressman Danny Davis remarked, Lewis was a very common, decent guy, just the essence of decency, the essence of honesty, the essence of integrity, the essence of virtue. The man who was beaten time and again while peacefully protesting was entirely committed to nonviolence. He didn't succumb to bitterness and act out with aggression. He led with love. He immediately reached out his hand. Lewis inspires love, and he inspires hope. Last July, in a Facebook post, Lewis wrote, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Do not become bitter or hostile. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. We will find a way to make a way out of no way." Shortly before he died, Lewis wrote an essay that he asked be published on the day of his funeral, which was on July 30th. Here are his final words of inspiration to us. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, Lewis continued, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. In the cacophony of human chaos in our country right now, we can keep on keeping on. We can keep the faith. We can look to one another for inspiration so that our response to hatred and greed and divisiveness is not despair, but a resolute belief in a better future, a tenacious belief that we can make change happen, that we can make this world a better place. Hope is powerful. Hope is transforming. We can let love lead every interaction, however benign or complex. Let us reach out our hand. Amen.